All right, folks, welcome to Turkey Hunting Tips and Tricks. So we're kind of taking some highlights from other webinars that we've done and also taking some experience that we've had and doing some more storytelling through this webinar, more so than the Turkey 101 and Turkey 102 courses. And we're happy to talk to you all about some tips and tricks that you might use for the remainder of the season, which is coming fast. All right, so some quick reminders before we get started. Your microphones and webcams are disabled, so sit back, relax, and take in the information as we work through it. But you can interact with us, and if you have any questions, you can put that in the Q&A window. So we'll answer those live or through writing back to you in the Q&A window, depending on your question. And if you like to talk amongst yourselves, there's a chat window where you can respond to each other. So feel free to enter in any questions or comments through that, and we'll be happy to expand on that. We love tangents, so feel free to interact with us. And just so you guys know, we will be sending you an email with a copy of this PowerPoint, as well as a link to a recording and a feedback survey. I myself is Jason Buckley, and joining us tonight is a man coming off of a very lucky weekend. Well, some say lucky, others would say skilled, where he not only got a chance to harvest a bird, but got to shoot at two birds, which rarely happens. So he got to harvest one of them, and he'll tell you all about that later on. So Curtis Twellman is going to be our main presenter tonight. So welcome, Curtis.
Yeah, we'll be talking about my recent third season hunt here in Illinois, which, yeah, like Jason says, was basically two hunts wrapped into basically an hour. But that's the fun thing about turkey hunting. It can be fast action, it can be frustrating too. So we're going to talk about all that here today, but it's going to be fun. One thing that we don't want to forget about, the star of the show is going to be turkeys, but right now is the lottery for your firearm slash muzzleloader deer permits. So right now we've only got to the end of the month, which is rapidly approaching. So if you're not in this yet, you better get in it. This is residents only. Non-residents, I think, can apply in the later portion, but right now, residents, first dibs. Don't want to forget about that. Now, one thing that we always mention is just how hunters sustain conservation in North America, not just Illinois, but across the country. And this has led to a lot of conservation success stories, and wild turkeys are definitely one of those. Around the turn of the century, back between 1900 up into like 1950, turkeys were basically not here. It was relocation, translocation efforts, and conservation habitat work by organizations like National Wild Turkey Federation, using dollars not only that hunters spend when they buy habitat stamps, buy permits, but also through things like the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is an excise tax on firearms, ammunition, and sporting goods that sports people have been paying since 1937. So some conservation success stories, and wild turkeys are a great example of that. I already mentioned them, the NWTF, National Wild Turkey Federation. If turkey hunting is something you enjoy, something you want to get into, highly recommend checking them out. Check out their webpage and join them, because you're going to get not only to come to their annual events, the banquets, and other things that they do, and meet like-minded outdoors people, but you also get the magazine. You get all that resources that are there to learn from people, not just in Illinois and the Midwest, but all around. So really cool. Definitely recommend joining them. And they are one of our partners that we work with at Hunt Camp. So that's a event that we will be having the details coming up real soon. But definitely shout out for NWTF. Now, turkey hunting for me is a game of plans, and I always have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and just go down the list. And for me, plan A is generally trying to get up and hunt near the roost. Now, this can change on how basically aggressive I am with this strategy, depends entirely on how many days I have to hunt. Now, if I only have 1 day to hunt, I'm going to be aggressive. If I have a full 5 days where I can hunt, then I'm going to play super conservative and I'm going to stay off the roost a far distance that opening morning and maybe not hardly even call and just observe. But the point I'm trying to make is basically your aggressiveness here directly correlates to the amount of time you have to spend in the woods. Because if you do mess it up, if you do get too close, if you bust the birds off the roost, that can flat out ruin your hunt. It could be over before shooting time even begins, which is not good. So take that into account. But ideally, if you can, you want to go out the night before and try to do what they call roost a bird or put a bird to bed, put a tom to bed. Basically, you're going out and trying to listen. Hopefully, they make a gobble right when they fly up into the tree to roost, or maybe you can invoke a shock gobble by doing a crow call or an owl hoot or some natural sound that'll make the bird sound off. But basically, you just want them to make a noise so you can start to narrow down where they might be. And so if you're doing that in the evening, maybe you're hiking around, maybe you're in parking lots, but I really like to have a printed out map for this. I mean, I'm a big fan of the hunt stand and the Onyx and using your phone to mark locations and all that. But when it comes to trying to narrow down where a bird is, I really like that hand-drawn map. So when I hear it, I can draw it on the map, and it's easy for me to visualize that way, and easy for me to keep track of multiple birds. And here's an example of that. You know, if I was out there and start hearing gobbles, then I want to start circling areas where I think that they are. And then there's a couple different methods where we can try to further down narrow where they might be. One of those is if you're familiar with the area, if this is a spot that you bow hunt, small game hunt, um, if you're constantly out there sort of noting what habitat types are, basically look for mature trees. Now, turkeys will roost in about any tree out there, but in one study I looked at that looked at all the trees that they roost in, about 50% of the time they're choosing mature white oaks. The other 50% of the time it's spread out. It might be red oaks, um, might be elms and ashes, maples, hickories, just a whole mix of things. But mature white oaks do make up about 50%. And I think one of the big reasons for that is just the way they grow. When you see a big old white oak, it's a giant trunk and it generally has several branches that kind of come off on almost a 90-degree angle that basically look like a really good, comfortable spot for a turkey to sit. So if you know where those areas are, that can help you to narrow it down. Another thing that can help you is the wind. And you might be thinking the wind, like this isn't deer. Why are we thinking about the wind? Well, with turkeys, it's not so much that the turkeys are going to smell you as basically in the early spring, the turkeys are trying to stay warm. And even though during the daytimes, a lot of times we're seeing a lot of nice warm temperatures, at night the temperature does fall, and birds are not the best at dealing with that. So they'll kind of go into a semi hibernation state called torpor to endure the night. But at night, thermoregulation is something that they think about. So if you've got a hard wind coming out of the northwest, and it's a cold night, you can look for areas that topographically will be protected from that wind. And more times than not, that's where your turkey's going to be roosted up. Now, some things to remember. Once you do set up, you want to try to anticipate where you think the bird's going to fly down. This can be difficult. Now, if you get the opportunity to see the bird walk in the night before, most of the time they will leave an area the same way that they came in. And it's an area they're comfortable with. ground they're familiar with. It's just the way they do it. So if you see them walk in, you know right where to go. If you don't do that, now you've got to put on your guessing game and try to figure out where they're going. And for male turkeys in the spring, most of the time, the first thing that they're thinking about is displaying. So they want to try to get into an open area where they can display, especially if they get fired up and excited because there's a hen nearby or somebody calling who's imitating a hen, which of course is you, the hunter. Um, but remember that when they do fly down, they tend to fly on the high side of a ridge. And that's because just turkeys are not the best flyers out there. They prefer to walk around or run around. They're better on two legs than they are flying. But I don't want to make fun of them too bad because, I can't fly at all and I walk around all the time. So I think turkeys are doing pretty good with the flying that they do. But when they fly down, a lot of times they want to fly down in a very open area, preferably the highest thing they can see, flat open area from where they are roosted. Now maybe you can get them excited enough to change that a little bit with your calling, depending on how many hens are in the area and how excited those birds are. But those are things you can use to try to judge your setup depending on where they're roosting at. Now here's a little example of triangulation. So to really do triangulation, we'd have to have 3 points. That's the try part of it. But really with just, if you can find two parking lots like this that are not too far away, because remember, a lot of times in the evening time when you're trying to roost a bird, there's a narrow window where they're going to gobble and where they're going to be at their roost tree. So it's going to be pretty close to dark until that light really fades. And then after that, it can be fairly hard for them to gobble once they kind of wind down for the night until the morning starts to wake them up. But so these two spots, when you get out at that first spot and you hear the birds gobbling, you may not know, are they across the river or are they on this side of the river? Now, on this particular property, the river is not the boundary, so you can hunt both sides. It's that double white line on the other side is the boundary, so you can hunt both sides, but that may depend on where you come in, how you access those birds. Then if you drive down to that south parking lot, add one more direction, and remember, you've got your printed out map, or if you want to put a point on a phone screen, if that works for you, that's good too. But for me, I've got the drawn map. I can really start to visualize where that bird is, or in this case, three birds. Turkey dinner's right there, right across the river, and that's a really good way to plan your hunt using multiple parking locations just to kind of narrow down where they are. Couple things to remember this time of day. Don't call until they call. So, as a general rule of thumb, only do locator calls until the birds really start calling, really start talking, and really until you get set up too, because you don't want to get them excited to come to an area that you're not at either. So keep that in mind. Um, and call soft. Birds in the tree just naturally call a little bit softer. Sound carries a little bit better. There's generally not too much wind, so always soft, soft, soft. You definitely don't want to blow anything out by calling way too loud, and a bird that maybe was silent is roosted closer to you than you thought. And really pay attention to how they're reacting to your calls, because that's going to give you an indication of how this hunt is going to go or how it's going to need to go in order for you to be successful. If you barely have to do anything and they're super excited, like we're going to see in the video coming up, just basically don't do much, because what you're doing is already got them on a string. Doing more only gives you the possibility of messing stuff up. So I generally like to think of it as do as little as you possibly can to keep the birds really excited. Now here's this video. This is from my hunt in Illinois, public land, Middle Fork, right here. Well, not in Champaign County, but just one county over in Vermilion County. And this is before shooting time, so I do want to point out it is illegal to shoot a turkey that is roosted before 7 a.m. Now, a lot of turkey hunters will say it's frowned upon to shoot a roosted turkey at any point in time, and I'd have to say I probably fall under that category where I don't really want to shoot one from the roost. It's just not a shot I'm comfortable with on a turkey. I want to call them in on the ground. But apparently, after 7 a.m., it's not illegal to do. However, ethics may be another question on there, but we'll go ahead and play this video. It's a little grainy, but again, this is before shooting time. So now I came in really early. You hear the birds. One thing you want to listen for, there's 3 gobblers, but one of them only gobbles occasionally. That was just 2. That was just 2. Hear the third one? He can barely gobble. He's so old. So these birds are excited. The third one hasn't gone again. There he is. Hear him? It's a weird gobble. This bird was ancient. Old as the hills, and the video stops here. This was my mistake. I should have kept recording because it was probably 20 seconds after this recording stopped when I hear wing beats sound like a pterodactyl over my left shoulder, and the bird lands about 15 yards in front of me. Full strut immediately. About a second later, 2 more sets, well, 1 more wing beat. Here comes the second bird, gracefully lands, starts strutting. Now here comes this third bird that can barely gobble, and he comes flapping in and basically just skids across the ground, like sliding like Bo Duke across his car hood in Dukes of Hazzard. And this thing, yeah, I wish I would have got it on video. It was hilarious. I'm sure this turkey had spurs that were like 2.5 inches long. It must have just been the oldest bird in Illinois, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, the way that this part finishes, this was my roost hunt. Obviously, the birds were super excited. I did very little. It worked perfectly. In fact, it worked so good, the birds came in before shooting time. I had to wait a long, long time. By the time I was sure it was shooting time, one of those birds was well within 10 yards of me, and it wasn't the really old one that I kind of wanted to shoot. It was one of the other ones that was more excited, probably the one that gobbled first every time, which was also a big bird. Started walking directly at me. I hurried up and got on it and clucked. It put up its head, and I pulled the trigger, and it was about 5, 6 yards away when I pulled the trigger, and I straight up missed. Um, I wasn't all the way down on the gun. I kind of counted my chickens before they were hatched, so to speak, because I was kind of already telling myself, wow, this turkey season's over before it began, which was a good lesson in humility, because you should never, there's always things that can go wrong. And in this case, that turkey got way too close to me, and I had to make a shot a little quicker than I needed to, and it was really, really close, and I missed. So I thought my turkey season went from being a success, being over in just a couple minutes, to now maybe I've messed it up for the whole season because this was the first day I've hunted. But luckily, I ran into some birds using my Plan B technique, which we'll see here in a couple slides. But These are just some of the tips that once you do know where the bird is, and this is in the early morning. So let's say you did not get a chance to go out and roost a bird, put one to bed, which by the way I did not. I just kind of came out in the early morning and waited until I heard something. Once you hear something, try to figure out a plan of approach, kind of like you would if you were spot and stalk hunting mule deer. So even though it's dark and the turkey wants to stay on their roost, they're awake, they have good ears, they can't see great at night, but they can see movement. And basically, you need to use some topography, use something, woods, to conceal your approach. Otherwise, they're going to know you're there. Even if you don't spook them bad enough so they fly off the roost, if they watch you the whole time, watch you sit down, and all of a sudden here comes calls coming from that very spot, well, guess what? Turkeys may not be the brightest thing in the woods, but on public land, they're smart enough to figure out what that means. So definitely keep that in mind, and try to get an approach to the birds that they don't have a clear line of sight to you. I really like to come in really early on that morning, knowing that I didn't roost a bird. I got out there early. I think I was there just after 4 o'clock, which is earlier than I needed to be there, but I didn't hear a bird gobble, I don't think, until oh, I'd have to look at my notes now, but it was like probably 4:45, so I waited around for almost an hour before I even knew what direction I was going, but that's okay. I still had enough time to use darkness to conceal my approach and was able to get right up on those birds within 100 yards and close enough that my calls got them excited. Maybe I guessed right, and that's where they wanted to land anyway. There's two fields right there where I was, so they could have chose either one. They chose to land within 20 yards of me, so worked out pretty good. And remember, when you're walking, they're gonna hear you. You're not gonna be completely silent, so just try to sound like an animal. Remember, deer, raccoon, everything is walking through the woods. If you move slow, stop, move a little bit, stop. The big thing is just don't do the consistent movement of a human like hiking down a trail. Vary that up, and you can actually get pretty close to birds before the sun comes up. Um, and be good. But another tip is then sit down and be completely quiet for a while. Let them forget what happened. Like, oh, okay, well, that was a raccoon that went to bed. Forget about it, and then start calling. Don't sit down and immediately start calling, because I do think they put that together sometimes. Now, here's an example of how you would use topography or a wood line to kind of conceal your movement. That parking lot down there in the south corner would not be good, because that turkey roosted in the mouth of that field kind of has a good view of you walking across that field for a good ways getting over there. So ideally, this parking lot up to the north looks like a much better route. Even though it might be a tougher route, you can utilize that topography and those woods to conceal your approach, get in close before daylight, and then close in those last 50, 75 yards really slow, acting like a deer, raccoon, or something like that. And you're going to be better to get to that bird from the north probably than that south lot. So let's talk about what can happen. Now, there's lots of different things that can happen. For me, we talked about what happened for me in my hunt this year, but here's all the different things that could possibly happen. Now, if the tom leaves the roost and comes your direction, I like to do, like I said, as little as you possibly can. If he seems to be hanging up or seems to be playing hard to get, because remember, the whole aspect of turkey hunting is kind of reversing what's natural for them. What's natural is the tom goes to a open area, displays, shows he's the fittest male in the area, and then the females come to him. We're trying to make him come to the female, so it kind of flips it on its head a little bit. And I should also mention, anybody that needs to go over any of that stuff, check out our turkey hunting 101 webinar. The recording's available on YouTube. You can watch it at any time, and it goes over a lot of the basics and detail that we're skipping over here today. But do as little as you possibly can if the bird's doing what you want them to do. Now, if the tom flies down and he's with real hens and he's not leaving them, that's a very common thing. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in here in a couple slides, but generally you got to change something up here. So either you need to anger that boss hen, which we'll talk about ways to do that, or you need to move and get in front of those birds. But something needs to change up, because you're generally not going to just call a tom away from real hens calling using a fake call. It's just not going to happen. So another thing, the tom could get hung up. Another really common thing. Anything can hang a turkey up. This could be thick woods. It could be a small creek. Obviously, we know the dang birds can fly, so they should be able to get across anything. But a lot of times it seems like again, trying to reverse nature. So they want to come a little bit, but any little thing that gets in their way is enough to change their mind. So sometimes you have to change up where you're sitting so you don't have anything like that in your way. Now, you may never see them. Maybe they're talking to you, then boom, they're just gone. What happened? At that point, you're going to be trying to do what we call, this is a lot of times my plan B, which is the run and gun method. And that's where you're going to be moving and calling and try to locate a tom who's excited, who's callable. The one cool thing about this, as a general rule of thumb, the later in the day you find a tom replying to calls, the more likely it is that that bird is going to come to you. So that means that bird's very excited and he's lonely, and you got what he's selling, or you're selling what he's looking for. So it's a good recipe for success. So don't give up on those later day hunts at all. Remember, gotta end at 1, and check your local site level regulations too. Some areas do close at different times, so always check that out. And then the last possible thing, you just never hear or see a bird all morning. Nothing happens. You don't hear a roost. You don't hear nothing from running gunning. And worst case scenario, you walk around the woods at a really cool time of the year. You get a good hike out of it. You see some cool migrating birds. Maybe you find some mushrooms. We got morels and pheasant backs that are popping right now. So 2 edible species that a lot of people like. And so yeah, that's not so bad. So here we are, plan B. And this is what I did. So here I messed up, I missed. That was the first turkey I ever missed in my life. Everybody says hunt long enough and you'll miss. And I was thinking like, yeah, well, not with turkeys, I'm shooting a shotgun. Well, it got me. Anyway, so run and gun. This method, this is fun because it's a lot of moving around, which I like. And basically, you're going to a good calling location and you're calling, seeing if there's any response. Most of the time, you're going to be doing a Yelp sequence. You could also throw in a locator call if you want. A locator call will tell you where the bird is, but it may or may not tell you if he's actually excited. So you don't quite know if they're callable. So I generally like to go with the Yelps, because that tells me where the bird is and if they are callable, which is what I want. And then just keep moving. It depends on the area you're at, how much woods, how much open. Generally, I like to go to a corner of a field, call, walk through that field, go through woods into the next field and call. So I just kind of go open area to open area to open area. Unless if it's big woods, then I may call in the middle of the woods too, because you never know where the the turkeys are, but basically every 200 yards or so, make sure you're calling, because sometimes it can happen really quick, like we'll see in this video that's gonna come up. Do remember that if it's windy or there's any conditions like that, you've got to call a lot louder for those turkeys to hear you. So here's an example of a map of run and gun. You would just have a loop, and every single one of those yellow megaphones there is a place that you would call. So you'd walk, call, walk about 200 yards, call, and just do that whole loop. And if you do that whole loop and you get back to your car and you didn't hear anything, it could be time to go to another parking lot and do the same thing. But this is the technique they call run and gun, and you're just calling in intervals and you're trying to get something to reply to you. So this is what I did. I mentioned after I had messed up the opening hunt. And here's what happened. Now, the thing with run and gun is it can happen really, really fast. This was my very, very first calling spot. So I had just shot, missed a bird. I'm befuddled in the field, thinking my glove had a hole in it, I guess is my baseball reference there. But anyway, I quickly regained my thoughts, remembered that I still had, several hours to hunt that day, and I heard other birds gobbling kind of to the south. So I took off that way. This is the opposite direction of where the birds that I shot at, one of them, they flew to the north. I went to the south because I heard a bird gobble down that way, that wasn't in the group that came right in front of me. So I'm thinking maybe they're not boogered up. So I walk that way about 250 yards. I call, immediately get a response, and I immediately sit down. And that's what you see in your screen. I sat down. This is a hillside. It's kind of hard to see because I was filming with my phone in portrait mode. But this is a hill, so that's really downhill going in front of me, but it's about 20 yards to the wood line down there. And since I set up so quick, I was kind of exposed. You can see there's no real brush around me. I'm a little bit more exposed than I wanted to be. I was fully camo, but I unfortunately had a big orange sticker on my phone case. And since I was filming with my phone, I think the turkey saw that, and we'll see how this plays out. So see, they're excited. As soon as my calls hit them, they're gobbling. So I know I'm pretty excited that they're coming. But I still don't know if they're going to come across the creek at the bottom of this draw. Now they're louder. Now I'm like, oh gosh, how do I set my phone up so I can record this? And then I'm like, well, I'll just hold it in my forehand. There's the turkeys. You can see them. They're coming in. Now they are displaying big time right here. Unfortunately, the drumming doesn't come through recordings very well because it's too low of a frequency. Now right here, I'm waiting for this turkey to get its head behind the tree, and I'm going to get my head on the stock, so I'm in a shooting position, which you'll see here in just 1 second. It's quick. Right here. Now I'm in position. Now, this turkey may have caught me move a little bit because he freezes and he's staring at me. And remember, I've got an orange sticker on my phone staring right at him. Now, this whole time I'm on this turkey and I could blast him. He's 22 yards at that point, but I'm not sure which one is the bigger one. Now I know that they see me and I double cluck. They don't stop. So I have to wait so that I know that they're apart. Now, right now, they're behind one another. I didn't feel comfortable with the shot, but boom. The other one takes a couple steps forward. I felt comfortable, took the shot, obviously got the bird, but the phone went flying out of my hand and all the way down the hill. So that was pretty funny, but I found it and was able to get the footage and got the turkey. So um, now, one thing about the drum, I mentioned that the recording doesn't come through. You can almost feel it before you can hear it. And I kind of felt the drum before I saw the birds. So I knew they were close. I knew they were coming um, across the little creek at the bottom of that draw. And that's when I kind of moved the phone into my forehand so I could kind of record the thing. So pretty cool, fun story. Was able to get it on footage of it, which was cool since that made up for kind of messing up the first part of the hunt.
You caught to go back to the video, Curtis, you don't have to play it, but you kind of caught some behavior there when turkeys tend to be spooked or don't know what they're looking at, and they might caught you moving or a color on you. They tend to kind of flank you. I think it's because they can see like out the side of their eye, you know. So I've seen that a lot where they come around and as soon as they get spooked, they start moving around you. They don't come right at you, and they just kind of stay the same distance and kind of move around you, and then they'll move off. But you caught them before they got too far away from you there.
Yeah, also the freezing is kind of a dead giveaway because up until that point they were displaying.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden it looked right at me and it froze. I also don't tend to use decoys, and I didn't use any that day, so I had nothing for the turkeys to look at. That's another thing that could potentially help. But for me personally, I like to be mobile. I think if they get close enough to see my decoys, I should probably already have them anyway.
Sure.
So, but that could have helped. But yeah, good point. They saw something was up. They didn't know exactly what it was because they didn't putt, they didn't take off, but it was close. I was starting to get dicey whether or not I was gonna get a shot because it's kind of hard to see what the angle my phone was in. But when they were in two different locations, like when one was closer and one was further away, it was much harder for me to find a good shot, and then they got right in front of one another, so I finally had a good shot right there at the end. But a few more steps and I would have had to just pass on that because they were definitely heading out of
Hmm.
Dodge, as they say. But he's in my freezer, so I won that one. Anyway, henned up gobblers. We mentioned this. This is a really popular term and it happens a lot, especially this time of year. Now we're into the fourth and going to be the fifth seasons across most of the state. A lot of times the gobblers are already going to be with hens or a single hen. And in these cases, you either need to get in tight to the roost and guess right with where they're going to fly down, or change up your calling. Instead of trying to call and get the gobbler excited, forget about that. Try to get the boss hen excited. Whatever hen does most of the calling is kind of the term. Turkey hunters will refer to her as the boss hen. Make her mad. Everything that she does, repeat it back to her, but a little bit faster, a little bit harsher. So it's kind of the opposite of when you call to the tom and we talk about being soft and doing as little as you need to do. Now's the time to not be subtle. And I've got my diaphragm call here so I can kind of demonstrate a little bit. Hopefully this will come through. Jason, tell me if it sounds bad. Oh, if your pets are listening, here's a warning. This turkey call may drive them a little crazy. But so first I'll do the boss hen and I'll follow with exactly what I would do to make her angry. So basically, just every time she would yelp, I would do exactly what she did, but a little bit harder, a little bit faster. And hopefully, she keeps talking. And I keep doing that. And, I don't know what it says in turkey language, but eventually, sometimes they get really angry and they fly down, and it's the hens that are wanting to fight. And of course, you can't shoot the hens unless if it's bearded, of course, but what generally happens is if the hen comes over there that excited, the whole group does. And I don't know if it's just natural to stay with the group or if it's like in middle school when somebody yells fight and they all want to come see what happens. But that can be a great way to get a tom that's hinned up to get within range. So another way is just basically to ambush hunt like you would when you're bow hunting deer and try to get a plan for the route that they're taking and get on that route and wait. Now, this could be a time to up your aggressiveness on the decoy placement. This is a breeding pair here. This can be something that could excite a tom who's hinned up a little bit more if he sees a lesser tom that's um, actively breeding with a hen right in his range. That might be enough to make the tom ready to fight. But stay persistent, hunt when you can, and just try to not be detected. Once you get spotted, it can be a lot tougher to hunt those birds. So hopefully, don't do what I did and miss one of three when one of them was the biggest turkey in Illinois. That old turkey that could barely gobble is just going to get bigger as this webinar goes. But by the end of this, he'll be a world record, I'm sure of it. The hung up gobbler. This is another thing turkeys are famous for, getting hung up for anything. We've already mentioned this. This could be a little creek, it could be a big river, it could be just dense brush. It could be a ditch. It could be anything that's tough for them to walk through. And remember, they're not that tall and they don't like to walk through any dense cover that's taller than their eyes because they need to be able to see predators. So like tall grass that's twice as tall as they are, even that can be an obstacle. So keep that in mind, and you may have to move during your hunt. But to me, this is one of the things that makes turkey hunting so much fun. Is there is that moving aspect all the time, and you're trying to think one step ahead. And a lot of times that's moving fast through the spring underbrush while you're calling a bird that's excited and making all kinds of gobbles and drums and spits, and just an exciting time. So now the ways to sort of combat the hung up gobbler, increase your aggressiveness. So we talked about it with the henned up gobbler too. It could be the same thing here. Maybe you try to imitate a fight, something to sort of increase the excitement level with that bird. Um, Sometimes I call the fight like here throwing a change up. Sometimes you'll see for sale, even in the stores, they'll sell a lot of times their boxes, they'll be fighting purrs. And this is to simulate two gobblers fighting. So this is a really aggressive type of calling, and this is a type of calling that would scare away a lot of jakes or younger birds. But it's just two really coarse purrs going back and forth. You can do the same thing with a mouth call and a slate call, or a mouth call and a box call yourself. Just do one purr on one and follow it with a purr on another, and make it sound like two birds fighting, and maybe enough just to increase that excitement, just enough to get them to decide to fly across that. But sometimes none of that stuff will work. Here's an example. This was Dan and Thor hunting, and they had permission to hunt on this side of the river, not that side. So even though this gobbler is probably 100% in range, they can't shoot it unless it comes to this side, and they've tried everything under the sun, and it just stays there. So that's what they look like when they cannot be shot. But at least they didn't lose their phone and didn't fall down the hill. But no turkey either, so I think I'll take mine.
Yeah, I had the same problem. Thor was on a site that did border a river, and on the other side of the river, there in the morning we heard four or more gobblers calling off the ridge, and we could not get them to cross. I never got any down onto the sandbank like they did, but we just couldn't get them across. And then when we were on our side, there were some gobbling on our side, and then there were ridges that were in our way. So we were on top of a ridge, and then we called one of the base of the ridge, but it was about a 200-foot hill going up, and it did not want to come up the hill to us. So, and then we moved down, and by the time we got down to the bottom of it, he was gone. So they're fickle little buggers.
It's baffling sometimes, yeah, because you're like, really, you came all that way, and now this 20-foot little river that you could easily fly across is gonna stop you?
Hmm. I think it goes back to the natural behavior of the turkey is that the tom calls the hen to him, and he just doesn't want to put out the effort. And he thinks that she should put out the effort to get over to him, and he's like, I don't need to come over there, you gotta come over here.
Just chronically hard to get.
Hmm. Yep, playing hard to
But
get.
that's what makes it fun.
It
That's what
is.
makes it fun.
I know, and trying to trying to think of all the different reasons on why it didn't work out too, and anthropomorphizing the birds is always fun as well.
For sure. And one bonus I want to throw out, I have not found a tick at all yet this year, so that's a positive.
There you go. Yep, I didn't have any on me. I did a good bug spray. I had a dog out early spring, and he had a couple on him though.
Mm. Yeah, I have my clothing is treated with permethrin, so I'm sure that helps. But still, usually I find, a couple because it's so much sitting down where they can maybe get above it or around it. And yeah, so far none. So but sometimes it's not just the bird that can make things challenging, but also our weather here in Illinois in the spring. We've had everything this turkey season from rain to hail to snow to sun, just about everything. So we average about 8 inches of rain per year in April and May. So chances are, if you draw a 5-day season, there's a good chance maybe one or two of those days are going to be rainy. Keep in mind that the birds still have to do all their turkey stuff. They can't call in sick or nothing like that. They don't have any sick time or any ability to do that, but they might be silent. It could make the hunt a lot more tricky. Um, Now, one thing that it can also do is make your moving a lot more silent. So that could be one benefit. It might be easier for you to sneak up on birds, but they may not do near the gobbling that you're used to. They might also reduce a lot of their activity in the open and seek a lot more sheltered areas than what's normal. Wind, this is another one. Now, this can make the birds be silent. It can also just make it really hard for your calls to reach the bird. I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to somebody across a field, they might only be 30 or 40 yards away. But if you're trying to talk against the wind, sometimes that person can't hear you at all. So, definitely the same with turkeys. They have good ears, but they can't hear over the wind. So um, we do have average wind speed about 9 miles per hour in April, which is the highest average in Illinois. So we do have some windy days. um, there are calls that are a little more loud that are better for this. A lot of the crystal calls, crystal and glass calls that are really sharp, really almost hurt your ears. This is the time to kind of pull those out. Thunder and lightning. One thing we want to mention, just don't mess around with lightning. If you're seeing any electrical activity like what we see in the picture, probably not a good time to be hunting. Yeah, lightning doesn't, people don't tend to walk away from lightning strikes, and about 10 people do get struck in Illinois per year, and yeah, a quarter of them are fatal. So, not a huge number, but yeah, that's a bigger number than a lot of outdoor things that people worry about, like mountain lion or bear attacks. So definitely something not to take for granted. But if it's just thunder, sometimes thunder can actually invoke a shot gobble, so it could be helpful in that way. But any electrical activity, and I probably wouldn't be out there hunting. Now, some of us actually did get to see this year, and what was that? Was that the first? That wasn't the second. I think that was the first season up north when got a little bit of snow, and in the youth season when they really got some snow.
Yeah, youth got
Um,
hammered.
For sure. And I always thought that would be cool. I mean, it probably does change their activity level a little bit, might quiet them down, but they're a lot more easy to see in the woods against the snow. And you could actually even track them if potentially, if you came on a fresh track, that could be pretty cool. So, would be a unique and interesting opportunity. I've never really got the chance to hunt them in the spring with the snow. I've bow hunted in the fall and maybe flung an arrow or two at a turkey with snow on the ground, but not in the spring. So I think that would be pretty cool. Now, another thing you may want to do, this is a great time to bust out the blind. Because remember, a lot of times your hunting success is directly correlated with the amount of time you spend in the woods. And sometimes the person that's successful isn't the person that's really skillful, it's the person that just stays out there. If you stay out there, good things happen. And if a blind is going to make you more comfortable, do it. If it's raining and it's miserable to sit on the ground, sit in a blind. Get in a good spot where turkeys pass through and just wait. It gives you a chance. My favorite way to hunt, like I mentioned, is being mobile, moving around. But bottom line, if you've got a couple days to hunt and the weather's crappy, be comfortable and just be in a position where you can be out there, because that's you're definitely not going to get one back home on your couch. So um, this may be a time to just put your decoys out, call less, be in a good spot, let your decoys do the work, and just be ready to take a shot if the opportunity presents itself. Is some gear that's better. I mentioned already the crystal and slate calls might be a little bit more loud to call against the wind or rain, anything like that. But definitely don't forget your waterproof gear, gloves, and boots. Of course, you always need gloves for turkeys because they can see pretty good. So, gloves, face mask, always got to have that. But a hat with a nice brim to keep the water off your face, especially if you have glasses or anything like that that'll be out of commission with too much water on it. Definitely have a good brim, and then carry dry paper towels, Kleenexes to constantly wipe off your glasses or your other equipment too, so you can try to keep that somewhat dry. And then don't forget to clean your gun really good after a wet hunt. We're used to hunting a lot in the fall, so most people clean their gun all the time, and then you kind of forget about it in the spring because it's only turkeys. But especially if you get out there on a wet, muddy day, clean that. You don't want to come September and open your gun up and find rust. Oh, now, obviously, Illinois is known for just having really consistent mild weather in the spring, which is a joke. We are not known for that at all. So, in your short season that you get 6 days for, you're probably going to see several of these adverse weather effects. If those are the days you have to hunt, figure it out. But if you do have the possibility to pick which days you hunt, your calm, sunny mornings without much wind are probably going to offer you the most action, but hunt when you can. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Jason for some decoy considerations because, like I already mentioned, I don't really use them, but Jason uses them sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, and then just add on to waterproof boots. So something I ran into, I had water resistant boots. They weren't waterproof, and I had to walk maybe a mile and cut grass to get down to that river bottom where all the toms were hanging out at. And after walking through grass in the springtime with the morning dew, it feels like you have someone just took a cup of water and dumped it in your boot. So
For sure.
it might not be raining outside, but the ground may still be wet. So invest in those waterproof boots, or where what I had was wool socks, and so my feet stayed warm even though I was really really wet for most of the half of the day there. But
Oh, yes, I just gotta say, you unlocked childhood memories. My first memories of turkey hunting with my dad are just being completely soaked because walking through grass fields and it
mhm.
being dewy, when I was a kid, so I was short enough, it just got me completely soaked, and it was like I was like, man, I didn't walk through water at all, but it feels like I fell in a pond.
Oh yeah, yeah. It felt like I crossed a creek for sure. But all right, moving on to decoys. So okay, so like we've said before, you don't need decoys. A lot of hunting is marketing. So if you just want to get a taste of it, you don't want to buy anything that you're going to have in your closet for years to come. You can hold off on it maybe your first year, or if you're something that you're interested in, you think they'll help you out, go out and get some. The ones I got were on sale. I got 3 in a box. They're foam. They're very light. I think the whole, if you packed all 3 of them out, it'd be 2 pounds, and super easy to set up and compactable. Then there's other heavy dutier ones, one that like this one in the photograph here, like that's probably a shell, and the fan there can probably be replaced with a fan if you end up harvesting a turkey and want to reuse its fan to make your decoy look more realistic. That's something that people do, so you can dress up your decoy. And they do benefit you in that it does give the turkey something to look at. We'll talk about different setups on how you can set up your decoys, and there's some that are more aggressive than others. Some might actually turn off jakes, meaning the aggressiveness, meaning you challenging the tom or jake to come over to your area. So some of them may scare off birds, and others may intrigue them to come into you. And again, going back to the hung up bird that we were talking about, they may, and also going back and talking about how toms naturally expect the hen to come to them, they may start displaying far away from you at your birds that are there, and so make sure they're within range. So usually we tell people to keep their range, an average range of a turkey load on a shotgun is about 40 yards max. So have your decoys within that range for you, so that way you can shoot past your decoys if you have to, if the birds aren't coming all the way up to your decoys. So that's where we say the 15 to 20 yard range on your decoys, and being able to step off your decoys before you set them up, or as you're setting them up, and step off back to your spot. If you don't have a rangefinder, you can use that as a range to give you an idea, like, okay, well, that's 20 yards, so I got twice that distance is my lethal range. And yardage is pretty difficult to tell in a field. If you're in the woods, you step off to different trees and things. Like when I'm deer hunting in a ladder stand or climber stand, I know my ranges of the trees around me, and I have that kind of that circle. But when you're in a field, it's hard to judge sometimes. So the decoys actually give you something to help you out there too.
Yeah, I gotta say, turkeys look huge in an open field.
Hmm.
So, I mean, they look as big as deer. And I actually have a friend, she's an experienced hunter. She's got all kinds of turkeys, and she actually missed a turkey this year because she took a shot at one that was like 70 yards away, and she estimated it was right at 40, you
Wow.
know? And it's one of those things can be tough to do.
Yep. And then before we changed, that last one there was hunters may see, we usually don't use tom decoys because that is really aggressive. You're not, the only way, when you use a tom decoy, you're really only going to get the other boss tom in the area. Maybe that old one that Curtis saw might come over and try to mess with him. But we usually keep it to the medium level of aggression, which is going to be like your jake decoys and things like that. And you may get hunters coming along. If you're on public land, you might see someone come around the corner of a field and kind of glance over at your decoys, and hopefully they can recognize that it's not a real bird. But just keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, safety first.
Hmm.
And think about that when you're carrying it in and out of the woods too.
Hmm.
Because you're all camo. So if you're sitting there carrying a turkey decoy under your arm and somebody's hunting, that could be a dangerous situation. So always, if you conceal that some way in a pouch, or walking in and out is a good time to pull out your orange flags if you have them too.
For sure. So we're going to talk about 4 main setups. We're going to go over feeding, walking harem, fighting, and breeding. And this can go with time of year. So breeding may be like more the middle of the season and not as much as the beginning, or towards the end too. And then fighting, of course, can be almost throughout, depending on how active the birds are. And then feeding and walking harem kind of work throughout the season as well. So we can go from there. It's just an example of saying set the birds up in a way, also not only within range of you, but also so if the bird, you hear the bird gobbling, you want to set your decoys up, have them to where they have to walk past you to get to them. So that way they're not looking at you, they're looking past you, looking at the decoys off to the side, and they have to walk within range in front of you to get to them.
Yeah, likely if I would have had a decoy, then those birds would have been looking at that and thinking about fighting it, and they would not have seen me and my sticker on my phone.
Hmm.
But hey, I still got it, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah. So feeding setup, this is the generic look of a decoy that when you get one, usually it's a hen. You can also have a hen and jake set up together, and they're just kind of milling around looking like they're feeding in a field or in the woods. You can also put decoys in the woods as well, as if they're eating different masts and things that are in the leaf litter, bugs and whatnot. But so yeah, so this is the most relaxed birds, head down, kind of in a relaxed pattern, not looking around. They're not alert. They're not interacting with each other really. They're not being the one's not trying to court the other one really. They're just kind of just hanging out in a flock. Uh, and usually, again, just for weight and being able to carry them in, you usually only have 2 decoys, maybe 3 max. So you're not bringing out a bunch of birds like a waterfowl spread or something like that.
Yeah, you never hear of anybody, throwing out 2 dozen turkey
No.
decoys. Although in the fall, maybe that would be because they are in bigger groups, so who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
that's a good fall strategy.
Hey, if we get bored, we gotta start trying some new things out.
Decoy companies will love us for saying that.
Hmm. So then walking harem, so you're going to have these in a way that they look like they're walking out of the area. So that way, if a Tom or Jake sees this, they want to catch up to them and to try to head them off before they disappear into the woods. They might be harder to find that way. So again, this is commonly used on pardon me, the mowed paths that are around some of the public landfills that we have here in Illinois. So you're gonna have these set up pretty easily. And so yeah, so having the hens leading in front of the male turkey, you can have in this photograph here, you can have one that's displaying behind it. And that way it shows that they're interacting and trying to mate with the females or get their attention.
Yeah, I want to point out how bad that blind sticks out in this picture.
Bad blind. Yeah, this is not her photo, so we didn't set that up. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you can brush in your blind. When it comes to public land hunting, you can't break branches, but you can use fallen limbs. So
Dead
feel
stuff.
free
Yeah.
to cover that sucker up with any type of fallen down trees you can.
Yeah, break up the outline a little bit and try to get some stuff on the top to get it in the shadows helps big time.
Hmm.
Like that's a double bull blind. I love double bull blinds, but yeah, it stands out like a sore thumb to us. Do you think it doesn't to the turkeys who live there and have better eyes than us? So yeah, you gotta brush it in a little bit better than that.
So a fighting setup, you can have 2 male decoys interacting with each other, and you can call accordingly and have that kind of that fighting purr going on that Curtis mentioned earlier. This will bring in not only Toms to kind of see what's going on, but also Jakes might come to watch the fight occur. So it's almost like a schoolyard fight where everybody wants to come over and check it out. So that's another option you have. Anything you want to add to that, Curtis? Yeah, have you ever used one of these? I've never used that type of setup before.
No, not really. I've hardly ever used decoys. Younger, I did. I had a Jake decoy that I used occasionally. And I mean, I had birds that came in and like pecked it or whatever, but yeah, never used multiple for a fighting setup. This is a good picture though. I love this picture.
Yeah. And that's not a
Really.
decoy. That's a real Tom attacking a decoy.
Yeah, yeah, but they got all the iridescence on those breast feathers and like
Yeah,
the beard is flying. It just and he already messed up the fan of the decoy. It just captures it perfect, man. They're little velociraptors when they get angry.
yeah, yep. And then breeding setup. So you can take a hen. You might have one that's feeding hen, and then just put her on a shorter stake, and then have her so it looks like she's laying on the ground, and then have Jake behind her, so that way they look like they're in the process of breeding. And this may antagonize a Tom to come over and try to disrupt this. So again, this is more of aggressive and challenging that Tom to come over and assert its dominance on the Jake, to run over to your area and try to get him away from the hens.
Yeah, I feel like this is more of your like Hail Mary day 5 type stuff once you get into this stuff here.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just so easy just to put them out, just put out in a feeding pattern, maybe a walking harem, and go from there. It's this other stuff again. I think you're getting really into the psychology of the bird that you might miss a chance. You might miss a misread the bird and their what they're doing at that time.
Sure, and yeah, I think don't look past just using a single Jake decoy and throwing it out there because you get the benefits of having something that takes their attention. It's not super aggressive, so it doesn't scare stuff away, but it'll take attention away from you. And you may luck out and get to see something cool like the picture we saw where Tom comes in and just beats the crap out of your decoy,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
that's kind of cool.
I like some people who just want to use one decoy. It's interesting if you just want to use a hen or if you want to use a Jake decoy. I mean, if you're making
I
the
would say
sound,
Jake.
yeah, because if you're making the sound of a hen, they might not be able to see the hen, but they'll be able to see the Jake, and then they're going to want to come and fight the Jake. If you have the
Mm-hmm.
hen out there, I mean, they might come over to the hen, but then they might get hung up, and they have no reason to come over and fight anything because there's no Jake there to intimidate them to make them come over. So having the only single hen out there might not be as, again, not as aggressive as having that Jake out there.
For sure. Yeah, that's my opinion. If I was going to use a decoy at all, anything, it would be one single Jake
Hmm.
because it's easy to put out and doesn't scare stuff away. But yeah, I don't know. Fun that's the fun thing about turkey hunting. You can do it so many different kinds of ways, but it's interactive. You've got that calling aspect. You've got the decoy aspect that you can use or not use. You've got the moving aspect of the run and gun and the planning when it comes to trying to roost birds and trying to figure out where they are on a map. It really wraps up a lot of all everything that's fun about deer hunting is like wrapped into turkey hunting also, but you
Hmm.
get to do it in a much shorter time frame and it's action packed, you know.
Hmm. So we have some miscellaneous tips that we're going to close the webinar out with here. These are ones that we've kind of sat around the office and like, what else can we tell people they might not understand right away? So we just jot these down real fast. We'll run through these. So if you haven't shot at a bird before, it's not a great idea to shoot them when they're strutting because one aspect of shooting them with shot is not only the penetration that it gets, but also it could snap their neck with the momentum of the shot as well. So when you shoot a bird and it's all fluffed up and he's presenting, its neck is really well supported and it's also kind of a smaller target. So that's why Curtis was trying to make kind of that double cluck when they were moving across in front of him there to try to make them stop or lift their heads up. And so you make a little cluck noise and it makes them lift their head up even when they're strutting. Make them lift their head up and then take a shot from there.
Yeah, it helps you keep pellets out of the meat too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then overcalling. So when it comes to calling, you're gonna pretty much whatever works for you the first time is probably what you're going to swear by from there on out. So if you called a bunch the first time and you're lucky enough to get a bird, you're going to be like overcalling doesn't exist. I call constantly and they come right into me. And if you get a lot of success at that, more power to you. But Curtis is more kind of explanation of how he calls and being more conservative in your calling and why do more when you can do less type of attitude towards calling. Is definitely the way that we preach our calling and our points to give to people. And then always pattern your shotgun beforehand. So if you never shot a shotgun before at paper, just straight at paper, we suggest you do that. You could have a turkey on it, but it could also just be like a pizza box if you want to. And you shoot at various ranges. So starting at 20, 30, 40. Again, usually 40 is the max. Make sure you're patterning with the shot you're in the load and the brand that you're planning on using when you go turkey hunting so that we can see how your gun interacts with that product. And that will help you understand the lethal range of your gun as well as the choke tubes that you're using if you need to change your choke tubes up. Make sure you read your choke tubes. They should have written on them if they're okay to use with steel or lead. Usually full choke tubes you can't use steel on because the steel is too hard and it might damage the end of your gun or hurt you as well. So we highly suggest you reading your products and make sure you read manuals of your gun and also your choke tubes. Make sure you're using the right stuff. Lead is a softer than
Usually it'll
steel.
be printed right on the choke tube
Yep,
itself too. That might be worn off, but most turkey choke tubes will say don't use steel too hard. If you have to use non-toxic, you can use like bismuth or tungsten or things like that, but not steel.
exactly. Yep. So doing that process will allow you to see how your gun interacts. Dan, for instance, his gun shoots. It's a really nice gun. I forget what type of gun it is, but I know it's not a cheap gun. And it shoots high to the right, and so he adjusts for that, and he knows that. And I've seen him shoot a target, and he shoots his gun very well, even though he knows he has to adjust for that. And it's just how it shoots. It's shot out. So understanding that and not just assuming your gun shoots straight is really
I
important.
also got to recommend with what happened to me this year, like shoot your gun once at really short range just to see
Hmm.
what you're working with. Because um, I don't think I've actually ever patterned it that close, but I've patterned it at 10 yards. And even at 10 yards, I'm dealing with a shot string that's not too much bigger than like a softball. So my guess is at 6 yards, I don't know. It's maybe a little bigger than golf ball sized, but yeah, it's something at least to be aware of. Birds can be too close, also.
Hmm. And then in case you shoot and miss and you want to go and move on other birds, bring extra bring extra shells with you. Always good to have a couple on you. You can have 3 in your gun and then have a couple in your pocket or your fanny pack or backpack. And then don't be afraid to move. That's again one of the more fun things about turkey hunting. And then a rule of thumb I always go by is if you can hear the turkey, they can hear you. So if you're yelping at your loudest call, then they can hear you yelping. So keep that in mind as you're moving around the woods, and use cover, use thick cover, use topography. And one other tip is like as if you're not using decoys especially, but as the tom moves, if you're in a wooded area, call when the tom's behind a tree, not just so they can't see you, but also so they don't know where the hen's at. And so as they're moving around, they get more inquisitive, like where's it at, and they'll want to come closer to you if they're hung up as well. So something else to think about as you're moving around and calling to toms. So again, don't be afraid to hunt without decoys. Curtis was clearly successful without decoys. Don't forget to sandpaper or your scratch pad. So, and then also don't forget to chalk your box calls. So whatever call you bring with you into the woods, make sure you have things there to help you prep your call, especially if it gets wet, because chalk on your box call, as well as the surface of your pot call, can get wet. Or like when I was calling, I was out for a while and I was calling a lot of my pot call, and I had to retreat my pot call using my scratch pad because my grooves kind of wore down from where I was calling at. So it sounds kind of goofy after a while. Then you just retreat it real quick with your scratch pad. You scratch in the same direction across your pot call, and then you pull your striker perpendicular to the direction that you scratched it at. So that way it's going across the different ridges on your slate.
And if you have questions about that, we do have a webinar all about turkey calling that tells
Mhm.
you how to do that and shows you how to do that in great detail. So feel free to check that out. It's up on YouTube as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, always as you start hunting more and more, soundproof your equipment as much as you can. As you're walking around and you're hearing your bag jingle or your call kind of squeak or whatever, figure out ways to fix that. So if your box call's in your fanny pack in front of you there, and every step you take, it kind of makes a little chirp noise, put a glove on that or wrap it in a rubber band. Figure out a way to silence it, because you want to be as stealthy as possible as you're walking through the woods. And that goes for any type of hunting you're doing. When birds are close, um, you don't have to, again, like Curtis said, do less, right? Like like forgetting Sarah Marshall, do less. Um, so yeah, so just let the birds come in, and don't I know you want to call almost to the point where they're standing right in front of you. It's slightly it feels like it's a challenge, and it's something that you want to do, and it's really hard to fight that urge. So more than you probably think if you haven't been turkey hunting before. So try to not call as much. Again, and then learn the body language of birds. Like we said, they kind of flank you and they move around. They might pause and stare at you, and then or they might be fluffed up and then go less fluffed up and kind of look alerted. So as you hunt more and you see more bird behavior, you're going to learn that as you're in the woods. You can also you can hear uh, when toms are responding to your calls. Doesn't mean when they're not responding to you doesn't mean they're not coming in. They come in quiet all the time. And there's one, I saw it on Instagram. There's a reel going around where a guy was doing a self-filmed hunt, and he's sitting there looking down a fire road, and he's calling for turkeys, and then he gets up, turns around, walks away to get his camera that's probably 30 yards away from him, and as he turns around to go get his camera, behind him on the fire road, a tom comes out and crosses the road right behind him. So patience is key. Just because you can't hear them coming doesn't mean they're not coming. And also that's kind of why I like hunting with a partner too, because they can kind of keep your emotions up and you won't get so doubtful. So hunting with someone, they're like, oh man, there's someone there's a turkey right around the next bend, or they can be coming in at any time. Just stay alert. And you got to learn how to keep that mental toughness as you're out hunting, and keeping it in the game, so that way you're not just going lax and come around a corner and just having a big tom fly away from you because you weren't ready.
Yeah, if you remember that video when I shot the one I shot this year, yeah, a couple of these play into it. First off, knowing the body language is once I got my head on the gun and saw the both birds moving to the right, I knew like they were no longer displaying. I was just waiting for my shot, and as soon as they got one in front of the other, boom, half a second later, that bird was on the ground. So that comes from knowing the body language, but then also they were quiet, so they were excited as soon as I was calling the first few times, and then I cut it out. I should have actually left it in, but right before getting ready there, I called and there was nothing. And that's when I knew they were coming, because I called, they were excited, they answered. I called, they were excited, they answered. And then I called and they were quiet. And I'm like, that means they're in the process of coming towards me. And sometimes that can take a while because they're stopping to display and they're drumming, which I could basically feel, but not hear. So yeah, pretty cool because those things were visible right in that video, I feel like.
Yeah, every time that we were calling when I was with Thor, and we didn't hear anything for a while, I'm like, and he had just been gobbling, and every time I called, he gobbled back to us, and he was all excited. And then we didn't hear anything for a while. I'm like, hey, he could be strutting at the bottom of this hill right now. He's just not coming up
Yeah.
the hill. Like he could be right there. We just don't know. And then another tip is after the shot, if you never shot a turkey before, I always tell this story. When I was a kid, I shot my first bird. My dad was calling for me. He was behind me, and I shot the bird. And then all of a sudden, my dad, for the first time I ever saw my father run, he ran through the woods and quickly ran over and put his boot on the turkey's head. And that's a common way of dispatching a turkey. And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? And he's just like, I've seen these things get up and run before. So sometimes, depending on how well you hit the turkey, you might have stunned it. Usually not the case, but you never know. So quickly move over, and you can dispatch the turkey by stepping on its neck until it stops flopping around. The old saying of a chicken with its head cut off type of scenario definitely plays in turkeys as well. They have a lot of um, spasms and things after being shot, so it doesn't mean that they're still alive. So just go over, step on its neck until it's done flopping around. And again, be aware of the spurs. In this photograph here, this is my bird I got last spring. It had 1.25 inch spurs on it, and they're starting to hook there. So there was a pretty old bird with some sharp little daggers on its feet. So those can definitely do some damage. We always tell folks that our coworker Dan has a scar on his hand from doing turkey research. One of those went right into his hand, and he had a scar on his hand now from it. So definitely something to look out for. So don't be afraid of them. Just go over and stand on the head end of them. Stay away from their feet. Don't just go over and pick them up by their feet. They're going to be flopping around and can do some damage still.
Yeah, keep your hands away, but there are hunters out there that have shot birds and got fatal hits and then have lost those birds because they keep flopping. They flop into somewhere where hard to find them, or move a little ways away, and next thing you know, you look up and the turkey you thought that was in your bag is now gone.
Hmm.
So yeah, right after I shot that, boom, I was taking off just like your dad the first time you saw him run. What a memory.
Oh yeah. He's 6'6" and was in camp. He looked like the predator running through the woods. I'm like, where the heck is he going? It was so
Uh,
weird. I was not prepared for that. Um, But so yeah, so like anything else, gaining experience, especially I feel like with turkeys even more so because your season's so short. Like Curtis got his in a day, in a morning, in an hour. Dan got his in a morning. When it works out for you, you might only get an experience once, and to gain the experience you might have when you're deer hunting a whole archery season, you're able to harvest multiple deer. You can build that up pretty quickly. Whereas turkeys, you get a week in Illinois, unless you travel around the country and hunt different seasons in different states. You really got to take a while to get this experience built up. So don't beat up on yourself if you don't get anything. Like Curtis said, just being out in the woods in the springtime is awesome. When I was out, we saw 20 to 30 deer walking around. We had one come walk up to our decoys and was a doe was stomping at our decoys, checking out where our decoys were. We were sitting right underneath the bald eagle nest, and we saw bald eagles flying around the river that the dang turkeys wouldn't cross, but we got to watch the bald eagles fly around. So there's all these cool things that you can still get to enjoy while being out in the woods. But turkey hunting to me, it just feels like it takes a longer time to build up that experience as you do in other sports or other seasons. Um,
For
so yeah,
sure,
anything
yeah,
else to
but
add, Curtis?
enjoy the journey. It's a fun journey, like Jason said. It's everything about it is fun. So whether you're successful or unsuccessful, chances are you're gonna have a good and memorable time in the woods. So hopefully some of you listening still have tags for this season, for the last couple weeks here. So
Yep.
hopefully some of you go out there and get into some action, and if you do, we would love to hear about it. Definitely drop us a line on Facebook or send us an email, and who knows, maybe we'll ask to have your story on an upcoming podcast or something.
Yeah, for sure. I know I got that bird I had the photo of its spurs there. I got that in fifth season last year on the last day of the season, May 12th. And then this year I have fifth season again. So hopefully those birds are in the same area. I'll be heading back there first thing and seeing if they're around still. But
Got to
um,
recreate that photo,
exactly, that's the goal.
huh?
But yeah, so that's the end of the webinar for right now. Please follow us on social media if you like updates and you don't want to miss a webinar in the future. Sign up for our newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter that comes out. We plan every month. We plan our different events that we have going on. So keep track of that. We do. If you're interested in having season updates or lottery updates, DNR news. Follow us on Facebook. You want to see some interesting reels or how-to videos? Check us out on Instagram and YouTube. We also have a podcast that we post to YouTube and all streaming platforms as well. That's a bi-weekly podcast. We have experts on there, as well as chit chat amongst ourselves once in a while. Recently, we've had on the deer donation program from Illinois Extension and how they went through the first pilot year of the deer donation program and how you can help by donating a deer to them. That goes to local food banks in central Illinois as they try to grow that program that will extend to other counties. We've also had on a conservation police officer talking about the day in the life of a conservation police officer and what their training's like, as they had 25 open positions this spring to fill for their academy class. So it's a really interesting podcast. It's all Illinois centric, usually, and we're trying to use also the resources we have here at the university to talk to folks that are doing some of the science and boots on the ground stuff out there as well. So we're really excited about that podcast, and hopefully it keeps growing the way it does.
Another reason to follow us, I mentioned it before, but Hunt Camp. Hunt Camp is something we started last year, and it's our biggest event of the year. It's a social event for hunters, and it's for hunters from every skill level, whether you have never hunted before and you're just wanting to basically dip your toes in, to you're a seasoned hunter. There's all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, we have mentored hunts that are prizes that people win at hunt camp. We have gear. Last year, we had a bunch of binoculars, range finders, we had a gun. Anyway, Hunt Camp is an awesome event, one you definitely don't want to miss. It's going to be coming up in September, and we're actively working on those details right now. We should be releasing all the hunt camp details here real soon. So follow us on socials, or sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be sure not to miss that, because that's a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oh, we might have a question here, Curtis. Where do you sign up for newsletter? So that would be on our website, and you might actually, if you registered for the course, you may already be signed up for the newsletter. I think it's automatically you're signed up for it, so you guys might receive the newsletter. I'm pretty sure that is the case.
Yeah, but if not, our webpage is just www.learntohuntil.com, or you can also just Google search Illinois Learn to Hunt, and generally we're the first or second thing that pops up there. But yeah, newsletter to get reminders for everything, not only just hunt camp and all of our cool webinars and workshops that we do, but also reminders for things like the deer drawing that we mentioned. Don't forget, get in the
Yep.
next couple days.
Yeah, I like our newsletter. If you're tired of social media and you just want the newsletter, go back to the newsletter. I think a lot of people are going to shift back to that, as social media has kind of gotten gross over the years. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, newsletters. I like our newsletter. We also curate some articles and things like that that are around. So it's a solid resource. And but if we do man our social media very well. So if anyone's interested in shooting us a question or anything like that, we can answer that through any social media outlet. So if you have any questions about hunting in Illinois, not just for turkey, we're always available and we're happy to help you all.
And ours isn't like most social media. Ours isn't
No,
crappy. It's good stuff. It's full of wholesome stuff like waylaying turkeys.
that's right. Yeah, providing food for your family and enjoying the outdoors.
Yes, yes. Well, don't see any other questions, but like I say, hopefully some of you folks do have turkey tags for the later part of this season. Hopefully you get out there and make some memories, but if not, follow us and we'll let you know when the turkey drawing comes about this fall and you'll be ready to go out there and make some adventures next spring.
There you go. All right, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks everybody. See you, Jason.
See you, buddy.